All right. Angelica, thank you so much for being willing to talk to our students about the great work you're doing with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Let me paint a little bit of a context for you. As you know, because of the pandemic, our orchestra at Occidental started meeting online. And then over the summer, we continue to meet every other week or so to invite new members who are coming to Oxy and to continue our sense of community. So a lot of things came up in our conversation over the summer about what makes a good orchestra, what makes a great orchestra, and things like the ability to listen to each other, being empathetic to one another, and actually being able to be empathetic to others in our community was a topic that came up, especially in light of the Black Lives Matter movement. So one of the things that came up in our conversation was the very prevalent inequities in classical music and orchestra, right? So as we looked around in our own membership at Occidental Orchestra, we only had one African American member, and she graduated. So, we were starting to have a lot of deep conversations in light of all the things that are happening. And I'm always humbled by our students because they really challenge me to think about a larger context of how I've viewed things and sort of taken things for granted. And in being challenged by my students, I realize in my own choosing of repertoire, in my own programming, I was very happy with the status quo of doing Beethoven and Brahms and Mahler, because that's what I studied. Right. And so you program what you know, and then I realized I in fact was perpetuating that idea of classical music as being very exclusionary. So to address this issue and to become more aware of this inequities in classical music and orchestra, I decided, well, because we're going to be not in person, because Occidental is closed for students and everything is being taught online. At first I try to find a way. Well, maybe there's an app that allows to rehearse in real time, and so we went through that phase where all of our students and I try to find the magic application or program that would allow us to make music together in real time without latency. But of course, there's no such thing yet. So then we sort of leaned hard into finding a way to continue this very important conversation. So if I could share my screen with you, let me just show you. So here is our speaker schedule. So we started August 27, and we're very lucky at Occidental to have 5 members of LA Phil as our string faculty. So Gloria Lum, Michael Larco, Arusia Baltasian, Ted Botsford, and we just hired Jin Shandai as our second violin teacher. So we had two sessions with them. And then our last class, we featured our own faculty, Jean-Louis Ponton, who's a composer and in charge of our music production. So tonight I'll be interviewing Michael Larco.
That's great.
And then September 24th, we have Aaron Dworkin, who's the founder of the Sphinx Foundation. And we'll be talking to him about this exact issue of diversity and inequity. And then October 1 is Ted Botsford. And October 8, Aaron Flagg, who this summer was part of the committee that crafted the statement on racial discrimination by the League of American Orchestras. So he'll be our guest on October 8th. And then John Lofton and Andrew Francois will be talking to our students on October 22nd about the resident fellow program at LA Phil.
That's fantastic.
And then you're up on November 5th. What I'll do is I'll send you these links
Perfect.
because what I love to do is try to prepare our students to be really engaged with our speakers. So maybe have you review those links, and you can send your own links that you choose, or some kind of document for the students to read. But they will also view this video, and they'll get to know a lot about YOLA, as many of them, some of them know what it is, and because I keep mentioning it as a really wonderful thing. But I would love for you to tell our students about YOLA, all the great initiatives and work that is being done at YOLA, future plans, and what ways our students can contribute as citizens who support the arts, and all those things.
That's really great. It's so great to hear you talk. I think a lot of the realizations that you described about, realizing your role in perpetuating some of these systems of inequity is an experience that a lot of people are having, that most of us, I would say, are having. And I think it's an interesting time to be in this field. Also really great to hear you talk about the things that we certainly are more focused on right now, in and around community, in and around empathy, in and around togetherness. And I think it's an especially hard time, I know that we're finding right now, to really build that sense of community as musicians who can't play together. It's really torturous, I think. And I would say that especially for the musicians who were in our high school level orchestras, it's particularly challenging to really stick with it when you don't have folks to make music with.
The sense that our students have expressed is they didn't realize how important it was until we couldn't play music together in person.
Right.
That sense of loss of community was so painful.
That's exactly right. What a fundamental need, right? The need to be together as a musician. I'm really struck by how much we really took that for granted right now. So what's most helpful for you now? Do you want me to tell you a little bit more about me, or a little bit about
so I think
YOLA?
what would be really helpful is, so we can certainly talk to our students, because I'm not sure all of them would view this video as a preparation. But I think our students would greatly benefit from knowing some of the background of how YOLA got started at LA Phil, what is happening now in the different Nucleos sites.
Sure. I can give a sweeping overview.
How it's how it's functioning now is.
Absolutely. So YOLA started in 2007. And the way I heard actually Deborah Borda, who was our president and CEO at the time when YOLA started, tell the story, is that, at the time, Gustavo Dudamel, who's now our music and artistic director, was starting to kind of gain some popularity. And there was this orchestra that had started in Venezuela called, there was a El Sistema, the Simon Bolivar Orchestra, that was like really getting popular and getting noticed and starting to travel. And so there were a number of orchestras specifically interested in Gustavo Dudamel and really interested in recruiting him to be a music director. The LA Phil, of course, was one of those orchestras. And as part of the learning process that the LA Phil went through was visiting El Sistema in Venezuela, which was a program committed to giving youth free music education. And so when Deborah, at least when I heard her tell the story, she describes going to El Sistema in Venezuela and seeing, music making by young people from a million different backgrounds, that it was the most incredible orchestra and the incredible thing that she had ever seen. She visited various Nucleos and just was totally blown away. And she decided on that trip to Venezuela that regardless of whether Gustavo committed to being part of the LA Phil, that she was going to bring back a program similar here in LA. And that was kind of the founding of YOLA. So this is just before actually Gustavo Dudamel agreed to come be music director of the LA Phil. And we started with 40 students in South LA at one site. And that was done in partnership with an organization called the Harmony Project, which if your students haven't heard of that project, that program, you should absolutely check it out. So it's Harmony Project LA. And in partnership as well with the city of Los Angeles. So that's at Exposition Center. And that group of students would eventually play at Gustavo Dudamel's first concert at the Hollywood Bowl.
Hollywood Bowl, yeah.
Yeah, that he conducted, and that was his very first time conducting the LA Phil, and it wasn't just the LA Phil, it was the LA Phil and musicians of YOLA. And there were parents that sat, at the Hollywood Bowl and got to watch their kids play on stage. And I'll follow up with a video from one of the students who was on stage and is now in her first year of college. So stuck with YOLA from the time she was, I think, like 6 or 7, and now is in her first year of college. So I'll send that video for you all to watch.
Yeah, please.
But that was the beginning of YOLA, and every bit of programming is free to the students. In terms of, I should be specific, the instruments and the teaching. Of course, there's a lot that our students and our parents put into the program, like
of course,
transportation, showing up on time. There's a number of parent meetings, a number of extra rehearsals. So, it's free of cost, but certainly there is a lot that our parents and students put into the program and put into the community that we've built. So that's one site. That site is now called YOLA at Expo. And again, it's done in partnership, which is also an interesting aspect, I think, of YOLA, is the number of partners involved in the organization. I suppose it was about 3 or 4 years later, our second site was started. That's called YOLA at OLA, and that's in the Rampart district. So right in the heart of Koreatown in LA. I should also say YOLA at Expo now serves about 300 students. And has 3 different levels of orchestra. So essentially like a beginner's orchestra, middle school orchestra, and a high school orchestra. And the idea is that, or the goal at least, is that students begin, in that beginner orchestra and go all the way through all 3 of those orchestras. I think initially the idea was that we would support students through high school and then see them off to college. And I think as we've expanded and as we've watched young people, go through each of those grades and go into college, we've realized that there's also support needed in college. So we do stay connected with our alumni as well, which is great. Bouncing around a little bit, but that's YOLA at Expo. We have our YOLA at OLA site, which is also now serving about 200 to 250 students. Pandemic times are interesting, and student retention is certainly something that we're working through. But YOLA at OLA is done in partnership with Heart of Los Angeles, which is another really incredible nonprofit based in the Rampart district. And we partner with them to offer that program. They, at the time that we started YOLA at OLA, already had a very small music program that was more focused on rock and jazz. And so what the LA Phil wanted to sort of offer up was an orchestral learning space. So we brought that in and also still work with a number of students in that rock and jazz program. So that's great. It's a really great partnership there. OLA also has a number of services that it offers, including counseling services and other support structures for our students. Our third site is now called YOLA at Torres and is housed in East LA. And that now serves about 150 students. It started in 2014, so it's our newest, or it's a newer site, not our newest. Fourth site is at YOLA Camino Nuevo, that's also in Koreatown. And it's at a campus called Kane Sciart. And that actually is the first site that we started that supports in-school music learning. So in addition to an after-school program, we're actually, we have a program that offers in-school music learning for every single student in that school. So that's a really unique program and also extremely new. Started about 2 years ago. So we're very much still in the learning phases there.
Wow.
And then, so that's our fourth site. And as far as looking ahead, we're actually in the middle of building what we're calling the YOLA Center, which is at Inglewood.
In Inglewood, right? Yeah.
And I'll also send some links about that. But that is theoretically set to open in January. We'll see what happens in terms of building, and obviously the pandemic's had a bit of an impact on that timeline. So
in all of these YOLA sites, is it elementary school students that are starting, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, so it depends on the site. And I would say that we're continuing to figure out what's best. So at YOLA Expo, that's in our partnership with Harmony Project, students typically start around 3rd, 4th grade. And it's the same at OLA and at Torres. At Camino Nuevo, however, since we're working in school, we do serve kindergarten students.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And the other interesting thing is that at OLA, the way the folks who started that program decided to bring students in was actually that winds and brass players started at 3rd, 4th grade. Whereas string students were starting at 1st and 2nd grade. So they brought in a class that started sort of, close to each other, but not quite at the same time. That's since been adjusted. And obviously, again, in pandemic times, things are a little bit different. But normally, in general, we're starting kids around 3rd, 4th grade and then seeing them through the end of high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So my first job out of college was as a public school music teacher, where I taught everything from 4th grade general music up to high school orchestra, and I had 600 students.
Sounds about right.
School district of the city of Quincy, Illinois, was 44,000 people, and we had one big high school, one big junior high, and one big elementary school, grades 4, 5, 6, and then there were like 6 neighborhood K through 3 schools. And so, and the music teacher forces there were 4 of us total. And we did everything. And so, can you tell us about the teachers of these nucleos, and who they are, and how many students they have, and what kind of resources they have available to them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it varies from site to site. But I will say one thing that is different about working in an after school setting, right, is that so for one thing, our teachers are working with smaller classroom sizes, and most of them are not necessarily teaching multiple instruments, right? So when we're hiring for a teaching artist, and we do use that term really intentionally, we're looking for artists who do teach. And I would also say that we're asking ourselves a lot of questions about whether or not that's the right model, right? Do we need to have more of a balance of educators versus performers is, I think, a big question that we're thinking about. But in any case, the positions are part-time, and most of the musicians that we're working with this is a gig in the sort of mosaic of things that they do for their own creative lives. So some of them do a lot more teaching, some of them do performing and teaching, some of them are in studios, some of them also have their own creative projects, like they're in Wild Up, or they run their own summer music festivals so I think it is interesting to work in the after school space in education, because you get a mix of folks, and depending on the site, some of our sites have teaching artists who are more focused on the performance aspect. And some of our sites have teaching artists who are a little bit more in the educational aspect and have more of the Kodai training, more ORF training, and more specialized trainings, right? In YOLA, I would say that, it's I think a curse and a blessing, right? That you are able to teach just the violin,
Right,
and
right,
you can be a specialist in just violin.
right.
Some of our sites might require a little bit more flexibility, and depending on the age group I think that you're working with, you might have a
Hmm.
little bit more of a mix.
Right.
But yeah, I would say that that's a
So
unique aspect of our teaching.
I know in the Venezuelan El Sistema there is a lot of peer teaching going on. So like
Yeah,
as students get older,
right,
the ones who had been sort of just playing just downbeats of a piece, they start to play more notes and they start
right.
to teach their peers. So what kind of peer teaching happens? Is there kind of
Yeah,
a mixed level? Because one of the things I was really kind of shocked at was how many of the nuclears had varying degrees of age range.
yeah,
And then they were all in the same space. And I
right,
was wondering, how does that work? Like, because, in the US system, you put the beginning orchestra together in one
right.
group, then you have the intermediate and the advanced, right? And they don't
Yeah,
really mix. Like fourth graders stay with the
right,
fourth graders and so
right.
on.
Yeah, and I would say that our model is very similar. For the most part, if you're a beginning instrumentalist, then you are in the beginning orchestra,
Mhm.
whereas there's middle school, and then. But I think it's in terms of peer mentoring and peer teaching. We've had a few different programs. There was a mentorship program that we started at one of the sites that allowed that. Well, first of all, it was a huge commitment for our students. So the students came in early and did like a
Sure.
1 hour long training on some
Right.
aspect of
Yeah.
mentoring. And then were assigned students these are our high school students
Hmm.
who were
Hmm.
asked to be mentors or signed up to be mentors. So they had like an hour long training and then were assigned 1 to 2 students who either needed additional support or help
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
just wanted private lessons, and maybe we
Hmm.
couldn't find a teaching artist that was available to teach them,
Okay. Okay.
and so our high schoolers would mentor those students.
Mm.
Those students would also go into like children's orchestra rehearsals and be there
Hmm.
to sit next to
Right.
and support
Right.
those students, right?
Yeah.
So we definitely use it in that way, but it is, I think, a big thing that we're thinking about is and I would say I think a fundamental difference in YOLA's approach to teaching music, or at least what we're trying to think about when we're trying to ask our teachers to think about, is really shifting some of the culture that you're describing, which is that if I'm in this orchestra, I'm the best player and that's my ultimate goal, right? My ultimate
Mm.
goal is to get to the top orchestra, to be in the first chair seat and to be the
Hmm.
best. And yes, there are really important, those are what we would call achievement outcomes in youth
Hmm.
development, right?
Hmm.
So getting first chair, being first place, that kind of thing. And those are really important, of course. But what we're trying to focus more on are the things that you talked about at the beginning of our chat now, which is about
Hmm.
community. It's about
Hmm.
empathy. It's about making sure that the folks around you have what they need to be successful, because at the end of the day, your orchestra is only as good as
Yeah.
every single member of the orchestra, right?
Right. Right.
That, I think, to me, that's the more important aspect of what we're trying to focus on in terms of the peer-to-peer mentoring,
Hmm.
where what we're trying to teach our students is that the goal is not first chair. The goal is that the orchestra sounds great,
Yeah.
period. And I think that's yeah. So that's all part of our youth development approach. And
Yeah,
I
I think
think
that's really important because I was
right,
a camp counselor at Interlaken for 2 summers during my
mhm,
college years, and and I was in charge of 12 junior boys, and every Friday it's called Bloody Friday because that's when they
right.
compete
Challenge
for
day,
chairs. They challenge
right,
chairs, and
right,
they
yeah,
move up or down. And then of course, like
hmm
half my kids are crying, half my kids are like
yeah,
ecstatic, and I'm
yeah.
trying to like,
Right,
oh my
balance those
goodness, what
things.
what are
Right,
they doing
right.
to these kids?
Exactly.
Um,
Right. And it's interesting that you bring that up. We had a number of students that have gone to Interlochen in the past few years who were shocked
Yeah,
by
yeah.
that
It's a
system, right?
very cutthroat competitive
It
culture. I
it
mean, I was
is, right.
just so taken aback by they just accept that as well. That's how it is. That we got to
Yeah,
train them
right.
for the future. And I'm going,
Right.
you are
Right.
plucking these rose petals off their,
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I
um,
think when we're talking about making systemic changes in the
yeah,
field of orchestral music, like that's the real system that we're talking about. That's not
yeah,
an
yeah,
equitable system. It was never meant to be, and
right,
that's the problem.
yeah,
So, and I will say on our end, there's more that I think we could have done to prepare our students for that setting, because this is a pretty unique setting to learn music in.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that come up, I think, in my everyday, where you're trying to find the balance of both preparing students to reach those musical achievements, right? But also understand empathy and also understand community and the significance of how much you are relying on the person next to you at the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Can, so is YOLA involved in the summer program that LA
Yeah.
Phil puts on? Because I was
Yeah.
lucky
Yeah.
enough to be invited to a session 2 summers ago, and
That's awesome.
I don't know why they invited me, because I wasn't an El Sistema teacher, but I had a wonderful week interacting with all the El Sistema
That's
teachers around the
fantastic.
country.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
and
Yeah.
I got to
Yeah.
observe the two YOLA orchestras, and it
That's
was.
great.
And I was kind of surprised not more people knew about it, because I think it's a
Yeah.
really fantastic initiative that the LA Phil and YOLA is doing. So if you could tell us more about the summer program.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, this was in 2016 was our first time that we announced hosting basically a national orchestra for Sistema inspired programs. And we now offer it beyond just Sistema inspired programs, but in any case, so in 2016 we hosted 2 regional orchestras. So one was held at Aspen and the other was held at Bard College in New York, and students from Sistema inspired programs could apply to be part of it. This is a national orchestra, so if any of you know, like NYO from Carnegie Hall, it's a very similar model where the application is free. If you are selected to be part of this orchestra, then all travel fees, et cetera, are paid for. And so we hosted those 2 regional ones, and then in 2017, for the first time, held a single festival orchestra here in LA. We now host 2 orchestras. There's a chamber orchestra that's more for ages 12 to 14, middle school again, and then there is a symphony orchestra that is for students between 14 and 18, so high school. And it is definitely a bit of a competitive process at this point. We're focused on programs who I think are really geared toward that youth development piece. So programs that are thinking about music as the tool for youth development, not necessarily. So like if you're a musician in like the Claremont Symphony or youth orchestra, then maybe this program isn't for you. But yeah, to your point, there's 180 students in those 2 orchestras now. And connected to that, we host an annual symposium that brings together the educators, administrators, et cetera, that are either part of these programs, teach in these programs, or just care a lot about these programs for 3 to 4 days, depending on the year. And we host a conference that's really centered around the practice. And obviously for me personally, it's an interesting space to work in, because working for YOLA, we have our own program that we are learning from every day, and that we're sort of experimenting with and trying to tweak and change. And so we can amplify those things out and share out, but have so much to learn from other organizations, because we're one part of a really big organization, and that's the LA Phil, which exists to share music, right? YOLA is a smaller part of that, and there are a lot of other organizations that are more specifically focused on the youth orchestra component. So anyway, it's an interesting time, but that happens every summer. This summer, in light of the pandemic, we actually held a 3-week-long, is that right? Yeah, 3-week-long summer conference that held a series of events. And I'll also make sure I send the link to, we have some of the sessions that we did there that are still recorded that folks can look at.
Great, yeah. And so could you talk about the interaction with the parent body, which is LA Phil and YOLA, and because I'm interested in that interaction between the parent organization, but I'm also interested in how you talked about all the other citywide organizations that you interact with and collaborate with, because I think that's the model that a lot of orchestras should be looking towards, because I think for a long time I grew up in New Jersey. My best friend's parents were playing in the New York Philharmonic as musicians, and I would go over to their house and I would have dinner, and then of course the the adults would be complaining about the New York Phil, and I made a note to myself as a young musician, okay, never work for the New York Philharmonic, and
Yeah,
and I you know and I think every workplace has things to complain about.
it's true.
But as a young musician, I sort of had an ideal picture of orchestra as this sort of
Yeah,
pure business where there isn't workplace
yeah,
conflict. Everybody's fighting for the same thing. But of course, that's not the
it's
case.
just
But
not the case.
what I'm particularly would like for our students to know about this way of collaborating with community partners and citywide partners, I think that's a really interesting model
Yeah,
for other orchestras to emulate.
yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, quite frankly. So when YOLA started in South LA in partnership with Harmony Project, the reason that it partnered with the Harmony Project is that we had not done our own youth orchestra programming up until
Right,
that point, not especially not in communities that traditionally haven't had
right,
access to orchestral
right.
music learning, right?
Mhm.
So I think that there was an understanding of the fact that we were not experts. We did not have the ties to the community that we needed to be successful in this endeavor,
Mhm.
and we needed help. And Harmony Project had already been doing that work. They had a number of community ties, a number of parent involvement, support, et cetera. And so we partnered with them, and that I would say is a huge part of the reason that we were successful in really building ties to the community. And same goes with OLA. As we looked to build our second site, we really looked for a partner that we knew had deep roots in the community,
Mhm.
that we knew
Mhm.
had the things that we don't have. I also will say, the LA Phil is an expert in orchestra, and it is an expert in music making.
Mhm.
We are not experts in food support. We are not
Mhm.
experts in community development. We're not experts in youth development.
Mhm.
We weren't at the time, at least. So I think that the LA Phil as an organization was very willing to admit that. As we've grown, and the thing to note is that we're starting to be, I think, a little bit more adventurous. And like, so for Inglewood, there's not necessarily a partner in the same way. We will
Mhm.
very likely partner with various organizations to make sure
Mhm.
that our students are supported,
Mhm.
but we're not partnering the same way that we have like YOLA at Expo, YOLA at OLA, right? So
Mhm.
those are very key community partners that we're working with.
Mhm.
We're shifting away from that as we've grown and as we've learned, but we
Mhm.
didn't have. I would say we would not have been successful had we gone
Mhm.
about it that way at our first
Right.
couple of sites. That said, all that said, the challenging part of all of this, of course, is making sure that we're partnering with folks in an equitable way. So,
Mhm.
you know, um, are we supporting Harmony Project in a way that's fair, that makes them feel like
Mhm.
the programming that they're offering is seen, right?
Mhm.
And that's a very legitimate question for Harmony Project to ask, and for us to make sure that, as partners, we are showing up and being equitable in how we fund the program, and being equitable in how we support our teaching artists.
Mhm.
Um, this is a colleague of mine talks a lot about this idea of competing truths.
Mhm.
And to me, with partnerships specifically, and when you are a giant organization with a lot of funding that is
Mhm.
partnering with a really small organization, or a
Mhm.
comparatively small organization that does not have the budget that you have, there's a
Mhm.
lot of competing truths there, right? There
Right.
is the reality that you can support each other, and there's also the reality that we are in a position of privilege.
Right.
So those are things that we have to think about, and those are things that we have to talk really openly about with our partners. And there have been times in the history of YOLA that our partnerships have been super smooth, and there have been times in the history of YOLA where we've had to work
Mhm.
through challenges. So
Right.
that's some of the insight
Yep.
there.
I think a lot of orchestras tend to, um, uh, it's that idea of collaboration. First thing you have to do is really listen to your partner to
Right.
figure out what the needs are, right? And I think
Exactly.
the word that most professional orchestras use is outreach, right?
Yeah, right.
We're reaching out and
Yep.
sharing this
Yep.
this great
Yeah,
art that
gift that we
you know,
have.
in a very
Right.
colonial fashion,
Mm-hmm.
which just
Mm-hmm.
re repackages that
Right.
way of uh, privilege. So I
Completely.
think it's really important when orchestras engage with the community. You know, it's not
Right.
seen as sort of I'm reaching out,
Right.
and but it's more of uh, 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 communicating and listening and engaging about
Right.
what the need is, and being able to listen and respond in that way.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, language is so, so important to your point. And I would say, like, if you take a look back at some of how YOLA was described, it was certainly, we're giving, young people the gift of music.
Mhm.
Or we, these are young people that we aim to serve rather than, we are part of this community.
Mhm.
These are young people who are part of our community.
Mhm.
So, thinking about that us-them language
Yeah,
is
yeah,
definitely a key aspect of the work.
yeah. So in terms of what our students at Occidental, because they tend to
Yeah.
come from very different backgrounds,
Mm,
you know, the tuition being what it is, even though
sure.
Occidental does a great job of providing financial aid to a large majority of our students,
That's great.
they do come from places of privilege and backgrounds that they've enjoyed. You know, a situation like a flagship youth orchestra where they
Yeah.
tour to Europe and things like
Yeah.
that.
Right.
And
Right.
I think this even in the youth orchestra picture of Los Angeles area, you can
Right.
see immediately that discrepancy between
Absolutely.
youth orchestra that's based in Orange County or Pasadena versus a YOLA program. That is a big difference in the makeup, in the funding, in how it's funded, who is funding
Yep.
it.
Yep.
So in a way, there are these sort of silos that are set up even among youth orchestras.
Right.
Um, uh, so I think it's important for our students to understand that they've most likely come from one of those silos, right?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, and I would say that there are several teaching artists that we have working for us that come from similar backgrounds. And yeah, I will say too that I also studied in a more, traditional orchestral setting. Most of us did, and most of us learned about music in a very traditional orchestral setting. And
mhm.
Yule is, again, going back to this idea of competing truths. I mean, where I work for a program that's focused on youth development, so focused on building these ideas of empathy and community, with a tool, this, orchestra. If orchestra is our tool, that's a tool that's a bit antithetical,
Yeah,
to that work,
right.
and is taught in a way that's pretty antithetical to that work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think your students are not alone in sort of unpacking and starting to understand that history.
Hmm.
Our teaching artists, I think, are also in that. We are, we as the LA Phil are certainly in that with them. But yeah, I think a lot of the work really starts with asking yourself, where you see that and where you
Hmm.
contribute to it, like we talked about in
Right.
the beginning of this conversation. And
Yeah.
how do you really start to question your values of, being first chair, and your values of, what music you appreciate and what music you
Right.
don't appreciate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
My
so
son,
that's
who's 11, he's been playing the cello for 3 years, working on the Suzuki book, and I I grew up on the Suzuki book and really never gave any thought to
yeah,
the diversity of composers represented in the Suzuki
right,
books, right? And I
right,
realized, and some of them are gems, and but not all of them are. Maybe they
yeah,
deserve to be replaced by another composer who's
right,
more diverse.
sure,
So
yeah,
in I think it's really important for our
right,
students and all of us to think about, especially in context of this issue of inequity and
right,
racism that is inherent in classical music and orchestra. Uh,
yeah,
at every level, that there has to be space for reflection about what repertoire are we using to teach the very young students, the very beginning students, and not, and also to the very advanced students. Um,
right,
so,
yeah,
so
yeah,
repertoire, how we listen to our community
yeah.
partners. Those are really
Right.
important aspects.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting working with the LA Phil. The LA Phil is an orchestra that is uniquely diverse in its programming comparative to other orchestras. There is, from my perspective, still plenty that we can do
Hmm.
to improve that. But I think also there are members of our orchestra who have switched from calling themselves classical musicians to orchestral musicians,
Hmm.
right? Because what is considered classical and what is
Hmm.
classical and what is not is, I think, a subject that we should kind of question and we should
Yeah.
start to wonder about,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But in any case, one thing that we're grateful for is that our students not only have the opportunity to sit side by side with musicians and play Beethoven, but they also get to sit side by side and play behind Los Angeles Azules, and they
Hmm.
get to play cumbia music. And I think that, again, going back to that, like, why do we think Beethoven is more important than Natalia Lafourcade,
Hmm.
or name your favorite
Right. Herbie
rap
Hancock.
artist? Yeah, Herbie
Right.
Hancock, right?
Yeah.
Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's important that I think it is exciting to see folks really starting to grapple with that.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And in looking at the programming that the LA Phil has done in uh, recently in the past,
right,
it's always been a a picture of what an American orchestra in the 21st century should be doing. Right? It's
right,
not stuck in the 19th century. It's always
right.
forward looking. So I've always admired the range of and breadth of repertoire
Yeah,
the LA Phil brought to our community. But I'm also just gratified that LA with Gustavo is really
yeah,
spearheading a way to collaborate with communities that it resides in. So
right.
it's not a orchestra that's sort of isolated
Stuck,
from the
right,
city that it
right.
resides in.
Yeah, and I think that that's the really worrisome part, right? Uh, is whether the question is whether or not orchestras will be willing to grapple with some of these bigger questions,
Mhm.
and not get stuck
Yeah,
where they have been.
right.
Um, Especially right now, I think this is a particularly vulnerable time for a lot of orchestras. So
Yeah, yeah. I've been attending a lot of the webinars with Aaron Flagg and
yeah,
Daniel Bernard Romain over the summer,
yeah,
and I've got I was lucky to go to Michigan with Daniel and Aaron Dworkin, so
that's great.
and Aaron. So I knew them before all of this.
That's great. Yeah,
But it was great to see them advocating for this conversation to come to the forefront.
right,
And they described it as it feels like we're in some sort of weird time vortex where we have this opportunity to
right,
bring this issue to the forefront and people are actually listening. Whereas before,
right,
they would bring up the subject, but nobody was really paying attention to this issue. But I
right,
think for a number of reasons, a lot of people in the field are actually paying attention. And
right,
this is in a way, a moment where the conversations are taking place,
right.
and hopefully a large scale changes will be coming as a result of these conversations. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I think I am hopeful for that. Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is, like, kind of no excuse anymore. And
yeah.
even as someone who works for the LA Phil and loves the work that I do and has so much appreciation for the LA Phil, it's important too for us to acknowledge that we're also contributing to that system, right? And
Mhm.
that we are also, as much as YOLA is a wonderful program, it is important to say that the LA Phil benefits more
Mhm.
from having a program like YOLA than the
Absolutely. Yeah.
young people of YOLA do, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really important thing to acknowledge, that just because
Absolutely.
YOLA exists does not
Right.
make the LA Phil, sort of
Right.
exempt
The
from all
box
of
is
these
not
other
checked
things.
yet.
Right? No, nowhere near it.
Yeah.
And I think the question that we're asking ourselves, especially for the young people that we work with that end up deciding to go and pursue a career in orchestral music, that is an expensive, tiring, and exhaustive venture.
Yeah.
So, so what do we owe to those students who we handed a violin to, and now they feel really attached to this violin and have decided to make a career out of it? What do we owe that young person, right? Because again, we've benefited from working with this young person, and you know, if we really believe in a more equitable society, then there's more to do. So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
Oh well, you know, Angelica, thank you for spending this time with us and giving our students more information and things to chew on and think about. And I really look forward to continuing this conversation with our students when you appear before them on Zoom on November 5.
It was great. Really looking forward to it as well.